Hey, welcome back. This is Dr. Patricia Kolonicki, and we're just going to go over the final edTPA task for submission for LIU's EDI 613. So for our final project for edTPA, you're going to need to submit multiple documents, which puts together edTPA almost identical to what you're going to be submitting on your actual edTPA. So let's go over a quick checklist. These pages are found in your handbook, but I also annotated them with a few notes for this class. So the first part, Part A, is your context for learning. You have a template provided for that cannot be more than 4 pages. It has to be Arial 11-point font and 1-inch margins on all sides. Again, most of the templates you really cannot change, so be sure to pay very close attention to those restrictions. Part B is your learning segment. Again, there was a video talking about both the context for learning and the learning segment separately, so be sure you watch each of those. Your learning segment should be no more than 2 pages. Again, the same kinds of criteria for font and margins. Part C is your formative assessment. Again, this is an adapted or created assessment based on your learning segment. It's a formative assessment. It has no limit on length, so it can be multiple pages, but you do need to include a blank copy of it with any prompts or directions that you may have given your students along with that. Part D is your evaluation criteria. Again, I noted that up in the introduction. We talk about a chart that maybe mentions something like full credit, partial credit, no credit, and details for each question what specifically you're looking for in order to evaluate each student's formative assessment. Moving on to the final bits, the samples, the student work. This is work for your 3 focus students, so not all your student work, but again, my advice from the overview video is you should probably copy as many students as possible's assessment, have multiple copies of those assessments for each student, and do not write on them until you're absolutely certain those are the ones you're going to use for your edTPA. And even until the very end, I would leave sticky notes on everything with your writing on them. And then obviously be sure to mask or remove your students' names or any type of name of the school, any kind of identifying information on that work. You can also, if the student writing is illegible, you can write a transcript directly on the work sample. So there's a couple different things here. You also need to indicate the student number. So student 1, math work sample, student 2, math work sample, student 3, math work sample. If a student appears in video or audio, again, that's a recommendation. If you have younger students or students with specific learning needs, you do need to describe what that student would look like in the video or on the audio. You have to name each work sample and submit the word mathematics in the file name. So again, very specific criteria for how you're submitting it and what the labels will be. So be sure to reread that additional information part in this chart very carefully. If you notice here, it mentions video work again. I think it's it's a good idea to maybe consider using that if you have younger elementary students or students with special learning needs, ELs or students with an IEP. A video may be more appropriate, so consider that when you're using your actual edTPA. But for this class, it should be work samples. So I should have 3 pages or 3 files, 3 files, one for each student that you are submitting work for. And again, for our class, that may be work from your actual students that you had in your observing class, but that may also be 3 work samples from your colleagues or your students in this class, depending on how you did that. Final task is, nope, not final, sorry. Part 4 is your examples of student work from the re-engagement lesson. This is not required for this course. Since you're not actually going to be teaching the re-engagement lesson, you would not actually have sample documents. But be aware that your re-engagement lesson and your assessment used should connect to that central focus and the areas that your students struggled based on your analysis of that first assessment. So again, in a real edTPA, you would have work samples, you would have 3 formative assessments from the work that your students did after your re-engagement lesson. Again, 3 files named for the 3 different students, and again, could also substitute in video or audio work in this category. Now, here's the finally, part G. is your commentary. There is a template provided. It cannot be more than 8 pages. I'm not saying it should be 5 pages, but I'm saying it needs to be 8 full pages. If you are not writing enough and it's not 8 pages, then I would highly recommend going back and looking at some of the prompts and being much more specific. If they're asking you to cite information, cite an example, I would be much more specific and give multiple examples of where a student may be struggling in terms of the CPP. So this involves a template, and you need to answer the questions provided. Again, in my overview video, I went over it very briefly, but in this template, my annotated task for document, I have very specific advice for you on all of the different prompts that you're going to need to answer. So be sure to reread and look over this as you are completing your assessment commentary. It's really important to make sure you have answers to all of the prompts. And for prompt 4, there is an alternative since you weren't actually able to give the re-engagement lesson nor give a follow-up assessment. So there's a special question just for EDI 613 for that prompt 4. Hope that gives you a little bit more information about kind of wrapping up and what edTPA parts are due for our course. If you have any questions, as always, please don't hesitate to reach out via email. Thank you so much. Have a great one.